In this video, we will talk about painting children and babies with watercolor. I will be painting this adorable boy and his dog, and I will give you some advice on the best techniques for color application, and also we will talk about some color choices that work best for this subject matter. Painting portraits of children and babies is a pretty complex subject. It will be hard to explain, obviously, in just one video, but I did want to highlight a few key points that really helped me and hopefully will help you along the way as well. The first, and I think the most important thing that I wanted to mention, is how crucial is an accurate, precise drawing. I see a lot of artists get frustrated and struggle to complete their artwork because they can see that they want, obviously, their painting to look like their subject and they can't quite pinpoint what's wrong, but the problem is that everything is a little bit off. The features are very slightly wrong shape, wrong size, a little bit in the wrong places. The shape of the head is not quite correct. So you need to make your drawing as accurate as possible from the beginning, because further down the road when you start painting, it will be harder and harder to make corrections. You will get used to your painting. It will be hard for you to see what's wrong. And also watercolor, it's a medium that's pretty hard to control. You have to work fairly fast, so there will not be time to make corrections when you start painting. So my suggestion is to print out your reference to scale, apply charcoal to the back side of it, and to transfer the drawing on your watercolor paper. That will be our first step, and that will give us a good basis to develop this drawing further, and then later on we will start working with color. I don't see any problem with transferring the photo because this is just a rough outline. It's not cheating. I know that art organizations, even big ones like National Watercolor Society here in the States, they have no problem if artists transfer the initial drawing on paper from a photo, as long as you have the right to use this photo, of course. And especially if you're just learning, unless you're a super experienced artist, it will be very, very hard for you to draw everything correctly on just a blank sheet of white paper. Black and white reference photo will be also useful to us later on to check our tonal relationships, to make sure we have lights and darks all in the right place and of the right intensity. After I completed the drawing, I am going to get rid of the charcoal and the excess graphite with my dry cleaning pad. I am obviously not deleting everything. I am just lightening my drawing, and now we can start painting. I know it's very tempting to jump in and start working on the face and the figure of the boy and maybe on the dog. And I know a lot of artists do that, but I discovered that when painting a figure in an environment or even a portrait, it's a lot better to start working with the background than with the face. It makes your artwork more unified. It's easier to establish tonal relationships when you have the background already painted and not just tiny little pieces like the face and the hands painted on a blank white sheet. And also painting the background first kind of warms you up, loosens your painting muscles, helps with your concentration, because the face obviously and the figure itself will be the hardest things to do, and we can all use a little bit warm up before doing something difficult, same as in sports, same as in painting, in any physical activity. Take my word for it, it's much easier to warm up with the background and maybe larger details, and then work on the smaller details like face and hands and the little dog in case of my painting. I did not wet my paper, but I am working with a fairly large brush, and I'm picking up a lot of color from the wells. I like working with very saturated colors, and I'm allowing the color to run and mix on paper so that my background, I don't want it detailed, I want it out of focus. So I want everything to run and mix without too much precision. And you see, I am also allowing some of the paint to run into the back side of the boy's figure, because if you look at the reference photo, his backside is in the shadow, and it also kind of merges with the forest behind him. If you squint and look at the reference photo, you can't really tell where his back ends and the forest begins. So that's why I want soft edge there. I will probably be adding a little bit definition later on, but not right now. And I also want the figure to be part of the background. I don't want him to be glued on top, so that also helps me to blend him into the background, blend the figure into the background. And obviously working around the dog, he's white, so he just needs a light wash of color later on. So for now, I'm leaving him as white paper. Let's do something on the bottom here. This photo was taken in summer, but summer greens can be pretty cold and they're hard to reproduce without the painting looking kind of monotonously green, like acid green. So I'm using a lot of yellows and oranges, and my painting might end up looking more like the fall, which is fine. It's not my task to copy the photo exactly. My task is to create a beautiful painting. Okay, my painterly background is completed. Now I can work on the boy's figure. I have a little bit of shadow on the back side of his head, but I have not worked on his face. I'm leaving it to the last. I'm going to paint his clothes. Still working with intense washes with a smaller brush. A very important point I wanted to mention, and I know it's easier said than done, it's extremely important to look at your reference photo and paint shapes. Try not to paint inventory. We can think I'm going to color his skin and then I'm going to paint the eyes on top and I'm going to paint his nose and his ear. That's what I call painting in inventory. It's very important in our mind to forget that we're painting a portrait, that we're painting a figure or the animal. We need to look for light and dark values in the reference photo and for color shapes. So I'm treating the background as one large shape. I put it in. Now I'm going to paint the whole figure of the boy as another fairly dark shape with some slight variations of color and tone in it. So trying very hard not to paint separately his body and then attach the arms to it. Working this way will make our painting fractured, and it's a recipe for failure. Work on the dog as well. Some portions are in shadows, so I'm adding a lighter wash to create foreshadows. And I'm also using the same small brush to add precision to the boy's face. So his profile is painted out of the background. So now I think you see why I wanted to paint the background first, why it was important. And of course I have to be precise so he looks like the photo, otherwise it's not going to be a portrait but just a painting of a boy, which is fine if that's your goal, if you're just using reference photo as inspiration. But if you want the boy's parents to recognize their child, then we need a lot of precision when working. Let's darken the background behind him as well. Okay, and now it is time to work on the boy's face. The main thing I discovered when working on children's faces as light touch. Their features are so soft and so tiny that going with super saturated colors or with very dark colors all at once is going to age them, or they will look like painted dolls. They will start looking a little scary instead of cute. So small brush, transparent washes, and working wet on wet without hard edges. That's key. And in this case, less is more. Less details is better than heavy dark details. I never use any black or colors like burnt umber, burnt sienna on children's faces, unless you're creating a monochromatic painting, obviously. But if you're working with color, children will never have folds in the features deep enough to justify using super dark earth tones. And I'm talking about lighter skin tones, obviously. I will make a separate video about painting children with darker skin. But for now, we're talking about lighter skin tones, and I definitely do not recommend earth tones for that type of skin. So yellows, oranges, and pinks to create the skin tone, and also purples and greens. He's sitting in the forest, so you can clearly see that the green foliage creates a green shadow on his jaw. So greens for shadows or blues will work great, not blacks or browns. Okay, while this first layer on the boy's face is drying, I also added a few details to his hands. This will probably be pretty much all the tone that I will be adding to the boy's face. Everything's soft, kind of out of focus, but that's what creates the illusion of his young age. Let's work on the dog. A few more details there as well, even though he's white. The shadows on him are pretty intense, so I'm going to darken everything pretty much using the same colors, some blues and purples and greens on the dog as well. The same grass and leaves that surround the boy reflect on the dog's white fur, so he will have all this colorful reflected light on him. Now, looking at my background, it needs a few more strokes to make the boy stand out a little better. I'm using a fairly limited palette. I listed all the colors in the video description, and limited palette, as usual, allows our painting to look unified. Alright, my last step would be to add some darks and some highlights to the boy. It's extremely important to leave those details to the very last, and I'm going to add them with color pencils. Like I said, my painting is not small, it's 12 by 16, but the features are so tiny and require such precision that it will be very hard for me to do with the brush. So I am going to use color pencils to add the details to the boy's face, to darken his eyes, add some shadows in his nostrils, on the mouth, maybe work on the hair. And for the dog, I think I will use white gouache, but not for the boy. It will be too thick. I have a pencil sharpener handy because I definitely want the tips of my pencils to be very pointy. Working with dull pencils is just not going to help me very much. And again, the pencils I'm using are blues and oranges, some greens. I have a kind of ochre brown. It will be best for hair. And I'm also using white pencil. It is not opaque, but in this case, especially for hair, it kind of creates semi-transparent strands that look very natural. When I apply it on my dark background, it helps me to create a soft edge on the face. If you're interested in humans as art subjects and would like to learn more about drawing the structure of the human face, I have a class, You Can Sketch Faces, that talks about this in detail, teaching you how to draw and paint humans, from drawing correctly all the features, adding shadows, and adding color. It talks about adults, not children, so check it out on my website, tammyrupp.com, and then click on classes and on-demand classes. If you have Skillshare membership, it's available there as well. His boots have some raindrops on them, different colors. Let's add that as well. That all adds visual interest to our painting. And also there is some dinosaur design on his shirt. I can draw that with the pencils as well. It will be very hard for me to do with the brush, but pencils can help me out. Okay, my painting is pretty much done. Let's correct the edges on the dog, make him a little more fluffy with white gouache. I'm using white artist gouache. I lost his back leg there in the foliage, so I am going to use a stiff brush and some clean water to lift the paint and get the leg back in place. Let me know in comments if children and babies is one of the subjects that is interesting for you as watercolor artist, and if you would like to see more videos like this one on my channel. Thank you so much for watching this one, and I hope to see you in the next video here on Tammy Rupp Studios channel. Help other artists to see this video by liking or sharing it. To see future videos, subscribe and click the bell button to be notified when they're published. Thanks again and stay creative!